Okay, so this is going to be episode 1 of the N.Sane PodCrash. This may be one and only. We might do some more. Depends on what you guys think. So today I have Jumpbutton. Hello, Jumpbutton.
That's who I am.
And we're going to be discussing the Crash Bandicoot timeline. Things have been all wonky in the fandom. Some people believe one thing, others believe another. I just wanted to get my ideas out and JB's ideas out. So, right off the bat, I think it's safe to say that the original 3 games all connect perfectly. The 100% ending of Crash Bandicoot 1 is not canon, nor are the epilogues. Some of the epilogues are referenced, but they can't really fit in continuity.
So my take on the epilogue stuff, and this is probably eventually going to prove true of Crash 4 too, is that they really like to pick and choose what elements of those matter and which ones are just throwaway gags.
So it's
And
kind. Go ahead.
so it's I just always call the epilogues like half canon because obviously there's only a year between Crash 1 and Crash 2, but Ripperoo apparently does go off and get that degree. So,
Yeah. And with Papu Papu, they said that he took the land and sold it. But then we see in the flashback tapes that the lab's up and running while they're making Coco do her experiments. So like stuff conflicts, like you said, soft canon or semi canon. It's really like how you have fighter games where you have all these alternate endings and only like some of the endings actually follow through into the overall story. So, but we're in agreement. It's 1, 2, 3. The flashback tapes are pre-Crash 1 and pre-Crash 2. Uh,
yeah.
we have.
So I mean, if you want my list, like the order that I put stuff in,
Well, let me ask
because
you
I've done it.
this: do you have like the 99X game in there?
Okay, so see, that's where you start to get complicated. I don't really put the game itself in there so much as I like, because to get that you have to do the transitive property, right? Like on the run puts itself after mind over meter. It does that very
Correct.
deliberately. It
Yes.
puts it because it's the Doominator. You're collecting Doominator parts. The Doominator is broken on the island. The space head is laying on the island. It's very main timeline. It's in the story. So uh, Crumb shows up in that, and so do some of his minions. So to me, that means 99X or some variant of it happens at some ambiguous point. Makes most sense to me to say it happens towards the beginning because it came out around that time and it doesn't really touch any of the other stuff, but for the same reasons that like some of the Game Boy games, their stories are kind of floating in that same way where it doesn't really matter where they're at, just that they happen. That's where
Right.
I kind of see 99X. I don't really have it. I don't really like have it in the timeline somewhere. I just it happened,
I
and
like to put
these
it right
characters.
after Warped because it doesn't have Cortex. And Cortex, as you know, at the end of 3, goes back in time. So it explains why his absence and why like it's there's only 2 games in the entire series that don't have Cortex in them. One of them is the 99X. So to me, it makes sense that after Cortex got stuck back in time after 3, that the 99X game could occur.
Yeah, and plus it's also release order.
Yeah.
So I always I always go to bat for release order unless it's absolutely stated otherwise, or it just doesn't make sense or matter. Like the Game Boy games were coming out like alongside the PS2 games, and they kind of like float around. So to me, you can put them like at the end before, or like at the end of Twinsanity before Tag Team, where because Tag Team references the GBA games, whereas Twinsanity kind of doesn't, and like things like Nina in Purple, like technically Purple is Nina's first appearance for us, like in the real world, but it kind of like acts like everybody already knows who she is, so
I've seen
it's fine if
people
it comes
on
after Twinsanity, kind of.
I've seen people online state that Nina Cortex was younger in Crash Purple because she speaks like a child, but because it was her first appearance, she didn't have a personality, so they had to do minimal dialogue to portray her. So I don't really take that into account. People say that she was a child or a baby then. Have you seen that?
Yeah, see that gets my goat because like the argument, like there are lots of little like arguments like that that are sensible on their face that people will make where like you get how they got there, but it like if you think about it for like a second, it stops making sense because like Crash Purple, and this is why I focus more on events happening than like necessarily exactly when they happen. I do think there's a like a good order, and I have one written down where things make sense in this order. But like I think starting to like try and put exact years on stuff is where people kind of make their mistake
Oh, yeah.
because like Purple Nina looks exactly the same in that game as she does in Twinsanity.
Yeah.
But Twinsanity is there's a 3 year gap there where Cortex is frozen and Nina never comes up in Wrath of Cortex or prior, and then Cortex is frozen for 3 years. So like to me, it kind of has to come after, and it just like the, this is kind of what I keep going back to this, but like events matter, details don't. When to me,
Let
when
me
we're talking
stop you
about like
right there real quick because we had a discussion about Engine and his metal arm and how I was having a debate with someone on Reddit saying that just because he has a metal arm doesn't mean that Crash 4 is an alternate universe. And you said something really specific and I like how you worded it. Do you remember what you said?
no, I can't
You were talking about
remember things I said 50s
the
ago.
the you were talking about how like character designs shouldn't dictate.
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean when I say events matter, details kind of don't, because um, like if you Titans, for instance, like people, and personally, I think On the Run kind of like hints back at the original like canceled version of Titans Tiny. You know, back in the day, they were going to explain why he was different, and then they just didn't have
They
time
ran
or
out of
whatever the fuck.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, but On the Run, I can't remember where the fuck I read it. But like On the Run kind of sort of hints at it, like saying, "Oh, there was a period of time where he was smarter, but then he got messed back up or something."
Yeah,
I
it
don't
didn't
want to.
go
I don't.
super into detail, but it implied that he's gone back to his brutish behavior.
Yeah, so it's like they kind of hinted at what Radical intended originally, where Tiny was kind of like he's the
Experimented
first
on.
the the first Mojo experiment. So they because all of the details for this kind of stuff are there. They just didn't really get to spell it out for you. Like Titans has every mutant that Cortex makes in Titans is a crossover mutant. And that's what they do with the Mojo mutation is they cross animals together. So Tiny is he looks like that because he's been crossed over with another type of tiger. And we can't count that as canon because they never say it in the game. It was something they intended, and apparently they've mentioned it in interviews, and of course. Okay. they've mentioned it in interviews and stuff, but it's not in the game, so you can't really count it. But the intent is there, and on the run kind of hints at it. So like to me, to go back to Titans as the example, it's like when you look at that game's storyline on paper, it's just, oh, Crash went to chase down Cortex and Tiny tried to stop him. And so, in that essence, and even though, as I was just arguing, they had a reason for why Tiny was that way, and they didn't get to put it in the game, but they had a reason. So, it's explainable, and you can explain it in retrospect or retcon to fix it if you want or whatever. But on paper, the story of the game is not different because of that, right? So, like, Titans, Crash goes on an adventure, Tiny tries to stop him. Like, if you need to show it in a flashback or whatever, for instance, and say you show it in a flashback in a game that looks like Crash 4, we've seen a painting of what Tiny looks like in the Crash 4 art style in the castle. So in the flashback, you could just, if you don't want to lean into the fact that he was experimented on with the mojo and then turned back to his other form later, you can just have him look like he does in 4 in the flashback. Like, my take is always that, like, the art style is an element of the game, not an element of the continuity or the canon.
Right.
Because, like, to me, even like Crash 1 and Crash 2 are pretty dramatically different looking games, at least as far as character models. Like, some of the environment stuff is similar, but like, so like I would like, but that's one reason the art style never really bothered me, is because to me it's more about what the characters do with each other and like what happens to them than it is like what they look like. So like, I get where people are like, I don't like that it's inconsistent, like Injun having a metal arm for no reason, but like that probably genuinely is the reason, is that they just were like, oh, it'd be cool if he had that because it fits our art style. And it doesn't really have to play into like his character development. Now if they decided one game, just like he didn't have a missile in his head and they just didn't address that, because that's kind of like his fundamental character thing, that might be a little odd. And I get that's where like Tiny is kind of over the line for people, but like, and that's why I wish they could have gotten to explain it, because at least if they explained it, you can be something you like, and I guarantee a lot of people still wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
But at least it would like have an in-universe reason.
And the thing that kills me is even things like that could easily be explained away. They have the make another-ator where they can make perfect copies of Crash. They literally made a second Mega Mix. So who's to say they can't just make another biologic arm for Engine, Like, story-wise, there are ways they could explain it, even if it doesn't need an explanation. This is a universe where Crash has 5 fingers in one game, 4 fingers in another, and he goes back to 5. And then in other parts of the world, he has 5 fingers still, and he only has 4 here. So what? They're all alternate universes: the 5-finger universe and the 4-finger universe. It's like,
I've seen people actually say that, and because of the way the Crash fandom is, I can't tell if they're joking when they say it.
The 5-finger universe. Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong. He had like 4 fingers in 1 and 2. Then he had 5 and 3, and CTR, and then he went back to 4. Right?
I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that important, but the point is, he goes from 4 to 5, and then back to 4. It's just like.
But that plays back into the point we're making, that like, the story is really what I worry about when I think about the continuity and stuff.
Yeah, I had a video talking about Fake Crash and his origin. You might not agree with me here, but Fake Crash was shown to be created in Crash 2 and Trance, but he'd already previously appeared in Crash Bandicoot Warped, CTR, and then the Japanese version of Bash prior to that. But all of his appearances, and now he's in Crash 4 also, but but all of his appearances in Crash Warped and Crash 4, it was time travel stuff. So he still could have been created in Crash Bandicoot 2, and then he was just seen in Warped and 4 because of time travel stuff. And then in CTR, he's not in the adventure mode, he's only in arcade mode. So right there, that's not canon to the story. And then in Crash Bash, he's only available in the Japanese version. So again, he's not in the story. So stuff like that.
So you
Go ahead.
that's a way to fix that if that's how you interpret it. I always interpreted it as it was just he was just a weird dimensional crash that got pulled out of the portal by mistake. I didn't ever think that it was like him being created there.
Oh, well,
I've seen people interpret it that way, and I'm like, I guess. Like, I don't think that they ever really meant it that way, but I also don't think they really ever spelled out what exactly happened to begin with.
right,
But
and because
to your point, like, it was almost assuredly on accident, but like, there's ways to fix that if that was the intent, and it was like a weird mistake.
right.
But
So we're already like over 15 minutes into this. So let's get back to the actual timeline and get off our tangents. So we have the original trilogy. You said that 99X can be there after that. Then we have 4, and this is where like the big debate comes in. I know where your stand is, but let's share it with the audience. Where does what comes after Crash Bandicoot 4 currently right now?
directly after Crash Bandicoot 4,
Yeah, like
Crash Team Racing.
okay. And I've seen people say, but he met Oxide in Crash 4. And what's your response to this?
My response to that, and it's backed up in the art book and in the epilogue, which is why earlier I said that the Crash 4 epilogue seems to have a little bit of Crash 1 epilogue-itis, where some things are set up for later things and some things are just jokes, like Engine doing a fucking jazz album or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But so Oxide is a mechanic in 4. He runs that big space station, gas station, whatever the fuck. And the art book kind of goes into this. Is that he's kind of in the lower castes of Gas Moxian society, but he wants to be a big famous racer like the rest of like the upper society. And then this kind of obsession, he goes, and then at the end of the game, he goes off to become a racer. So it would then make sense, of course, that he goes off, becomes a great racer. What I like about this is that they've made sure to put N.Trance and a couple of the other aliens in that epilogue.
I know Zem was
also,
in it.
Yeah, so it also explains how Entropy knows N.Trance, because Tropy knows N.Trance because he knows Oxide. Which is another funny thing to me. This is just like a little headcanon thing, but like I always thought it was weird that like in Crash Team Racing, Entropy just doesn't seem to give a shit about what's happening. Like he's not worried about the planet or whatever. He's just offsetting best times and whatever. and it kind of makes sense now because it's Oxide and he's like not scared of Oxide.
Yeah.
He's just like whatever. But
yeah,
like
that's a good point.
So Crash Team Racing to me comes after 4, and then this is the only point where I'm gonna like waffle. Is I say Crash Bash comes after that.
So Crash Bash happens after that.
Yeah, explicitly the hero ending, because if it was the Uka Uka ending, it would obviously not go well for anybody.
Yeah.
And then he wouldn't have anything to bitch about in the intro to Wrath, right? So the intro to Wrath is him. He's rounded back up the bad guys. He's getting them all in a room. He's like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, we haven't done any good evil." He like pulls up his shitty little chart. He's like,
the arrows going all the way down.
And like at the time, I think I even thought this as a kid. So it's another little headcanon that makes it funnier to me, is that he's like, you guys are off fucking racing go-karts and playing party games. And look, I know the party games was my fault. I brought you in to do the party games. But we're doing a shit job. Right? We got to get back to some real plans.
We gotta take over. We gotta get rid of this Bandicoot. And now
And then
that
another
go ahead.
I was gonna say another nice thing that ties that back to the last couple of games being 4 and Crash Team Racing and Bash is that Entropy is like snarky at Cortex and trying to get him in trouble. And why wouldn't he be? Because he's like pissed at him, right? They're like, and that's a thing that 4 does very well is they've given context back to like the Tropy Cortex rivalry that's always been kind of hinted at, but hasn't really ever like boiled over until 4. And it makes stuff like Wrath where Tropy's like, oh, you should tell him about your secret plan that's totally secret that you don't want him to know. You should tell him about it. I'm getting you in trouble.
Yeah.
And like in Twinsanity where like none of the villains take Cortex seriously at all in her. And then like Embryo's whole arc across the series is like these failed attempts to get back at Cortex. And like in Twinsanity, he teams up with Tropy to try and steal the treasure out from under him. In Mind Over Mutant, he works with him so that he can stab him in the back, but then doesn't pull the trigger because he's a little wuss. Same thing in 4. He's starting to like there's lots of little things about 4 that to me are like almost nonsensical for them to have done in a sequel to Warped if they weren't trying to connect back up to everything else. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with that because
like
even when you're the what was it, the Serenity Gardens level, you have Brio talking in the background, and he's like, "Hey, let's team up," and he's already like planning to backstab Cortex. It seems, even though he wants his approval.
Yeah, so like it's kind of he's kind of like that abused character where he like can't quit Cortex, but he really fucking hates him.
Yeah, because in the flashback tapes,
And
he's like,
"Hey,
clean up my puke," and
especially in Twinsanity.
yeah. So that brings us. We went from 4 to CTR to Bash to Wrath of Cortex Twinsanity, which then we go to the handheld games.
So for me, Twinsanity rolls. And here's where I'm going to say something that a lot of people get irritated with. Twinsanity rolls into Crash Bandicoot: The Huge Adventure, or XS if you're in any of the good parts of the world. And people are always like, "Oh, well, where's Crunch then? Where the fuck was he in Twinsanity? He shows up at the birthday party and does nothing the fuck else."
Exactly. Just because a character does not appear doesn't mean they don't exist. Which is what I heard a lot about in, oh, well, if Crash Bandicoot 4 happens here, then where's alternate Tawna in all the future games?
Well, I reckon she went back to her universe because the fucking masks spend the whole game telling you it's bad that they're not in their own universe.
No, but listen to this. So we're making a reason as to why alternate Tawna doesn't appear in any future installment, but people were perfectly fine with normal Tawna just not existing ever again. She was in the first game, and then she didn't appear again until Boom Bang. Nobody has a problem with that, right?
She got fucking fridged. And people were like, oh, she broke up with him because some Japanese strategy guy said it one time. And I'm like...
I saw someone's headcanon saying that, oh, well, now that we've had Nitro Fueled come out, it makes sense that she left Crash to go pursue her dream of being a kart racer. Cool. But yeah, I just thought it was funny that they can accept that normal Tawna doesn't exist in any games ever again, but alternate Tawna needs a reason why she doesn't show back up.
Yeah, she's busy, bro. But like,
she's busy going on adventures.
And that's another thing.
They showed that in the epilogue.
I think the Grand Prix themselves, like the DLC for Crash Team Racing, happens way later.
I agree with that.
Because it clearly happens after Nitro Kart. It clearly happens after Tag Team.
Because all the characters are showing back up.
Yeah, and there's a narrative, and like when Velo shows up, he's like, "I'm back." Like, if you gotta be here once before you can be back, right?
Yeah.
So, so like, I split the DLC. The DLC to me is release order, right? It can't. It's like the next new thing after Mind of a Mutant at the time,
The
because
only
it's
thing
the
that I
first
disagree
actual
with
new.
there is I feel as if the Rustland Grand Prix happens at the very end. So
Yeah,
it came
I
out
would say.
before the Gazmoxian one, but I feel as if chronologically it happens at the very end.
Yeah, and I think Rustland is mostly like a gag, anyways, right? It's like, hey, this is what the future might be. Isn't that shitty? But like, yeah. To get back to the actual timeline, so I can like tell you where the rest of my stuff lays out.
Yeah, go for it.
Huge adventure, then Entranced, because Entranced ties directly to the ending of Huge Adventure. Because Uka Uka's like, I'm gonna go get a new bad guy, and
Yeah, and the
Cortex is
opening said like Cortex's last
yeah,
plan at
he's
shrinking
a
the world failed.
yeah. So then he does. Tropy does his thing again. He gets his what we now know to be his second attempt at being the big bad.
So Tropy's the big bad the second time.
Yeah, and that's where he drags in Entrance because he knows him through Oxide, as we said a minute ago.
Right.
He tries that whole thing. Entrance gets his ass whooped, and then Tropy gets his ass whooped again. That's another thing that ties to the Huge Adventure is you collect the shards of the gems that you broke at the end of Huge Adventure. Nitro Kart happens next. It's a direct sequel to Crash Team Racing. It's very heavily hinted in the intro that Oxide is who tells Velo about Crash's world. Uh, Trance and all of them show up because they all know Oxide. They all know Velo. That whole alien race circuit thing is crazy. Purple is after that just because it's the last one that came out handheld, and it like kind of doesn't really directly connect to anything other than Crash and Spyro in general. Tag team for me is next. Purple is where it is, both because of that and because to me it has to be after Twinsanity because of Nina. Tag team is next because Nina's in it. Uh, Radical themselves don't consider like their writer did not consider this a mainline game, but I don't really see any reason why it can't be. It's just kind of a weird spin-off like any other like mainline spin-off is. Uh, Boom Bang is after that for me. Uh, for the same reason as tag team, it's just kind of goofy and there's like
I
no
see
real reason
people
not.
say that Boom Bang can't be in continuity because Polar and Purah are anthropomorphic. But in the
And
Nitro Fueled, literally they just wear clothes all the time anyway, and they could stand up on two legs like it's no problem. Plus,
yeah,
they
so
drive go karts. It's like,
they're clearly using them back legs for something, brother.
yeah, so I don't have a problem with that. So Boom Bang, then
Um, from Boom Bang, and the other thing people don't like is, oh, how could the Viscount's grandpa be on the Titanic or whatever? Is one thing I see all the time. You could easily explain that if you really wanted Boom Bang to be canon, and I do, and I have ways to explain it, but I'm keeping them close to the vest in case I don't want them to steal from me. Right? I've got all these great ideas. I don't want them to
well,
talk.
you and me have personally talked about that stuff, so we don't have to talk about yours. But my thing was Crash. He is Crashworth Cortex the first, so he's not biologically Cortex's son, but Cortex considers him a child of his. So that's how I took the whole Viscount backstory thing, where he said his grandfather was a treasure hunter and he was on the Titanic and stuff. I was just took that as his creator's grandfather, or his creator's father rather, would be his grandfather.
Yeah,
So
you could definitely take it that way.
So
Um,
like the things that people say make it impossible to fit in continuity, it's like there's really easy explanations as to how things can fit in
and
continuity.
and plus, I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they ever actually call it the Titanic. They
No,
just say that the
they don't
ship had
call it. They
sank.
just say 100 years ago or something. and it lined up because it was 2006 when the game came out, so it was roughly like a year off from when the Titanic actually sunk.
Yeah. So there's wiggle room.
Yeah.
Are we gonna have to pause again?
No, we're good. I just started another one, so we're good.
So after Boom Bang, you just get back on the rails. Crash of the Titans. Crash of the Titans doesn't really connect up to anything directly in the intro. This is where people get really contentious about it, where they're like, "But the Shadow Puppet intro shows a different origin." I'm like, and the cutscene that's actually in the game says that's not true. So like,
plus, dude,
like, oh,
no, go ahead, keep going.
In the game, there's literally a boss fight where you fight under the Evolvo Ray. And Uka Uka says, "Remember the Evolvo Ray?" Like,
it's like if you didn't, it's like the gun wouldn't be the Evolvo Ray.
Like, it's the little Shadow Puppet intro thing is clearly just like a little abridged catch-up thing, or hell, maybe it's not even Crash, it's some other little mutant. Like, it's just flavor, right? It's not. But like, anyway, either way, in the game, you have stuff like Uka Uka talking about the Evolvo Ray, and you have various characters mentioning things that have happened in other Crash games, like Tiny complaining that he wasn't in the last one to come out,
Yeah.
and things like if there's a hidden conversation right before Uka Uka's boss fight, where if you wander around and sneak up on some of the rabbits, they're complaining that Uka Uka's plan is to give himself a body, because they literally say he had a body a few years ago in Crash Twinsanity. It didn't go well. Like, they literally say pretty much verbatim that. They even say the word Twinsanity.
Yeah.
Like, it's clearly it's not a reboot.
And then after this game, this is where you may agree or disagree with me on this one. It's been said that Mutant Island takes place in between both Radical games. And we had I don't remember what they were called. They were like short cartoons. And one of them, Crash has the Make Anotherator, and he makes a whole bunch of carbon crashes. And then they're just never seen again. But then when you play Mutant Island, there's a whole bunch of Anthro Bandicoots that aren't explained at all. So I think that ties in really well. Their designs don't match perfectly, but they look like Crash does, and he's going around the island saving them. So I took that as those were the carbon crashes created post Crash of the Titans, which leads into Mutant Island, I thought. And then
you can definitely get away with doing that, yeah.
And then
I always thought it was weird at the time, because like in Mutant Island, all of the like the copy crashes look like old Crash, but Crash looks like Titans Crash.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
And another thing, they wear like the helmets, which are like a precursor to the Envies of Mind Over Mutant.
Yeah, like I don't remember why Mutant Island is supposedly between Titans and Mind Over Mutant, but like there's no real problem with it being there, and it's like the only one of the Java games that has like an actual story, from what I remember.
Right.
So like I'm fine with it being there. Like I've never, because it's one of the only ones that like really leans super hard on the
story.
Main game.
Yeah.
And but it's not an alternate version like
the Game Boy or the DS games.
Yeah, like Crash of the Titans DS is very like Crash of the Titans DS, Crash of the Titans Game Boy Advance, Mind Over Mutant DS. Like those are the only time you will ever hear me like be okay with the words alternate timeline for Crash.
Agreed.
Because that's literally what they are.
Because they're not even like
the same story.
Yeah, definitely. And then that brings us to Mind Over Mutant, which is the end of the timeline, minus Crash on the Run and the Grand Prix from Nitro Fueled.
Yeah, So Mind of a Mutant is kind of like the original end point, which was not on purpose.
They were going to
Really,
reboot the series. Remember?
yeah, but it still was. It's as far as I know, it still wasn't on purpose to end it there. It does actually kind of work as an okay ending, like as long as you're fine with it, like not being ceremonious, right?
Yeah.
But then On the Run said, "Fuck that, bump that. We're it's we're just gonna keep going at some point," which is great because I like that they just did that. So On the Run, the Grand Prix, except for the Wasteland one, which is like some nebulous floating future. I Toys for Bob is being kind of weird about Crash Team Rumble, like narratively. Like in a lot of the interviews and stuff, they like, no, it's not mainline Crash. It's not core Crash. It's a spinoff. So like, the Cat Bat comic is obviously like you kind of have to. That kind of has to be canon because it's Cat Bat's origins.
Right, and I would place that as pre-Crash Bandicoot 1, mainly because I know that the animated intro that we got for Crash 1 didn't actually make it to release, but it was an intended intro, so I've always kind of felt that as like soft canon. And when you watch the intro, you could clearly see Tiny and the Komodo brothers in their original designs in that intro. So I feel as if, just like we were saying, just because the character doesn't appear in the game doesn't mean they don't exist. So I always felt like all of the Cortex Commandos were created around the same time frame. And then you have
Yeah,
Catbat in the Catbat comic. They talk about, oh well, let's go make the Tasmanian tiger mutant now. They use the scientific name.
yeah. So Tiny's next. So it was towards the beginning of the island's storytelling here.
Yeah.
So Rumble, I think the actual game itself kind of just does what we're talking about for like the Wasteland Grand Prix. It just kind of floats at the end because there's gonna be crossover from everything that ever has been ever in Crash. So,
Yeah,
like, I don't
so what I was
like.
gonna
I think you kind of look at like because they've said they're gonna do more comics and stuff. I think you look at those for story, and then the game itself is kind of just like because even themselves they've said like the story is we don't really have like a story. We just have like a premise. It's it's the Wumpa Harvest. It's the Wumpa games, which is kind of just a framing device.
But what I was gonna say was, right now, as far as Rumble goes, it just feels like a multiplayer mode from Crash Bandicoot 4. And what I said earlier about Fake Crash not being in the story of CTR and how he was just an arcade character. Right now, I'm not 100. Like, it hurts me to say this because I want every game to be in continuity and in the timeline. But this game right now just feels like a multiplayer mode to Crash Bandicoot 4. So if they never make an actual cutscene story or they don't like develop a story to place it in the timeline, this might be the first game that I don't consider to be canon because it's essentially arcade mode for Crash Bandicoot 4. That makes sense?
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of where they're framing it. Like they're doing these comics and stuff that are like they've said will show the interactions between characters, but I from what I can tell so far, they don't seem to be like specifically based around Rumble. So like they've kind of just come along and said, hey, the Wumpa Harvest is a thing that happens in the Crash universe, and it happens like every year or so, and
Yeah, despite us never having seen one before.
yeah, but I mean, it's the same thing you're saying about the characters. Like, just because we don't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Just that reminds me, we didn't bring Thumpin' Wumpa Island into our timeline.
it's because I didn't get to it on my timeline yet.
Oh, I
Um,
go for it.
um, it's kind of the same thing. I just stick it at the end right now because I don't like all of this like multiplayer arcade stuff has been the only post Mind Over Mutant story development, but like none of it like necessarily connects to each other. Like the Grand Prix don't connect to Thumpin'. Thumpin' doesn't connect to Rumble. Doesn't connect to On the Run. So like On the Run, the only reason I put it after Mind Over Mutant directly is because the space head and stuff is still on the island blown up. Like, so the other ones, like Skylanders, Imaginators, the Grand Prix, Rumble, if they ever, like, is because they're kind of just like new episodes of Crash, but they haven't really like said, "Oh, this is when this happens."
Right.
So, like to me, it's Mind Over Mutant, On the Run, and then the rest of the stuff like Grand Prix
could be interchangeable.
Imaginators. Yeah, because there's just, and to be honest with you, unless like that's kind of why like the Game Boy games are where they are for me, is because other than the fact that they tie to each other that little bit, they're kind of interchangeable where they go in between the other stuff. It's just that like the other stuff has connections that make them not make sense there. Like there's nothing in Crash Huge Adventure or Entranced or Purple that says it couldn't happen between Wrath of Cortex and Twinsanity, but Twinsanity says they can't because Cortex is frozen.
Right.
So like you kind of have to like look around at other games to make them fit somewhere. So like there's but Skylanders, Imaginators, On the Run, Grand Prix, they kind of just are new stuff at the end.
They're in a bubble somewhere at the end.
Yeah, after Mind Over Mutant. And then, hopefully we eventually get a new game that's like actually at that end of the timeline. That kind of just says, hey, all that's like kind of all that happened. It doesn't really matter specifically exactly what order it happened in, but here's like a vague order, and here's what the characters were doing when they weren't there, and we just kind of get everything cleaned up. Because I think people are like kind of sick of this multiverse crap.
Yeah,
just in general.
multiverse fatigue.
Like
MCU, DC.
Like, and I think the MCU, for instance, would be very good for itself to get back to what made it originally popular, is that it wasn't multiversal; it was multi-episodic. Like, for whatever reason, there's like and I think it's just people are ingrained to like a long-form familiar thing. So like, it's cool to every once in a while see these like different versions of stuff, but people gravitate towards long form story stuff. So like if you just it's like Sonic is another example. For a few years they kind of like pretended that 06 and all that kind of stuff around there and in the middle didn't really super happen and they wouldn't talk about it. But then Frontiers comes out and it leans back into all of that.
And starts talking about every adventure. Not adventure,
like
quotations, just like the things that they have done.
Yeah, so like you'll be running around and Sonic's like, well, hey, this reminds me of Jet the Hawk from Sonic Riders. Remember him? And it's like, yes, I do. I in fact like when the game remembers that I played all the other games.
Yeah.
Which is what I was kind of worried about when Crash 4 was announced, and they were like, "Oh, all that stuff might have happened, but this is a true sequel."
So I see people say, "Oh, well, Paul Yan said that none of it happened," but then we have him saying that chronologically it takes place before the other adventures.
Okay, so I've read a couple of interviews recently from back then. They always say, like they said nothing flatly. They said nothing was retconned. They said nothing was erased. Everything was canon. They always said that. The other thing that they always kind of waffled on was, oh, they may be in other timelines. They may be in alternate universes or whatever. And then you play the game, and they never really do anything about that. And the 106% ending is just Uka Uka coming and finding Cortex, and it's implied that they go back to evil plots. Like, there's nothing in that game whatsoever that retcons that shit out. In fact, there are several things that hint at it not doing that. Like, Cortex's lab has schematics for Scorporilla. Cortex's lab has schematics for Crunch. Like, there's more in the game saying all that shit happens in this timeline than there is saying it doesn't. In fact,
You
there's
have
nothing that says it doesn't.
you have the elementals showing up in cave drawings in the Egapus
And like,
dimension. You also
yeah,
have
like,
they had the Mega Mix poster. They just the other one, they had the evil twins showed up in the Gasmoxian ship.
and the thing about the Gasmoxian one is that people are like, oh, it's a different dimension. I'm like, I don't really think it is. Like, there's no reason for them to put the question marks on the thing instead of a name for the dimension, other than it's ours. Like, because it's like a guy wears a mask the whole game, and at the very end of the game, he takes the mask off, and you don't have any attachment to the guy under the mask, so why does it matter, right? So there's no reason to say, oh, we don't know what dimension this is, unless it's one you know, because I mean that's just storytelling, right?
Yeah.
But then like the dingo dial thing, like people really 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 did not want the voodoo town to be part of the islands, which I guess it is, because the comic for Catbat says it is, but beyond the comic for Catbat saying it, it's like the game at no point says this is alternate Dingo Dial, and Dingo Dial recognizes Crash and Coco as his.
And it just says it says like a couple
a
days
couple
earlier.
Days ago or whatever.
Yeah, so it's clearly just a couple days ago, not an alternate dimension.
Yeah, and then but like but then you'll have people argue, oh, well, the elementals only show up in cave drawings in the alternate dimension, so that must be the Wrath of Cortex dimension. I'm like, I don't think that's, no, I think it's just an Easter egg. But like, that's one thing that kind of muddies it, is there are Easter eggs in Crash 4 that are kind of like wink nudge look, and then there are Easter eggs that are like, look, here's a picture of Crash Team Racing in Oxide's bedroom, even though he's not a racer yet. And it's like, so there's like little things that
see, but for that, like
hard.
both the things you said, maybe it's because I'm very into the lore and I like making explanations, but in Crash on the Run, every boss character that shows up has an alternate version of themselves. They have the Inferno, the Frosty, the Oxide, and the Nitro versions. Nitro being the standard universe. The only characters that don't have alternate versions of themselves are the elementals. So yes, you could be like, oh well, it wouldn't make sense that there would be a Frosty Pyro, but the way that I took it is that the elementals exist outside of the universes. So like the Hyperspace Temple, I feel as if it's outside the universes. So there's only one set of elementals. So the fact that
kind of hint that there's only one set of quantum masks,
right,
because they exist outside of, because Kapunawa is time,
right. So when people are like, oh well, they only showed up in the Egapus dimension, it's like, yeah, they could appear anywhere. They can travel to any dimension they want. They're the only set of elementals that there are. And then man, what was the other thing I was gonna say? I lost it.
You said two things that I said. So I was talking about that, and then I was talking about the Easter eggs. How like some of them are very clearly like lore nuggets, and then other ones are like, hey, look at that thing,
Yeah.
Right. So it makes it hard to like say, oh, this is hinting at lore, when other ones are just in there to be in there.
Right. So the last thing that I want to talk about right now is you and me clearly have the same stance that it's all one big continuous timeline except for the Game Boy Advance and DS.
I'm actually going to. I have the clip. I'm going to send it to you, so that you can put Paul Yan's verbatim exact words where he says this joke in the game ignores the some of the other games that are coming later in this chronological timeline.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description.
You can you can
But
literally
what I want
edit it in. I'll send you the clip.
okay, but the last thing that I wanted to
fact that it's ignoring some of the other sequels that are coming after this in its chronological timeline.
touch up on before we end this is we've said our piece. This is how we feel. What would you say if Crash Bandicoot 5 comes out and it does retcon everything out? Will you say, "Oh, they must have changed their mind and did that?" Or will you let everyone be like, "Oh, see, haha, told you. It was wiped out of continuity. You just didn't want to agree."
Well, here's the thing. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, people are going to say that either way. So I literally don't give a rat's ass what people say about it. I think it's a mistake to do it, and I think they realize that because Rumble, they're like, "Oh, we're going to bring things from all corners of Crash. We're going to bring in all the like." They sent out a survey after the beta where they were like, "What characters do you want to see?" And you know what? We're on it. Everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone. Like fucking Willy Wumpa Cheeks is on that bitch.
See, I don't expect it to get to nitro fueled levels of characters, but I do expect there to be characters that came post Crash Bandicoot 4.
Yeah. So point being, I think if they ever had that in mind that they were going to do, I think they clearly Crash 4 is architected in a way where you can either do it or you could not do it. Like I said, there is as much or more stuff in Crash 4 that like sets up not doing that than as there is to set up doing that. Like I used to kind of feel like the 106% ending was kind of weak for the reason that I was like, oh, it's kind of a cliffhanger to nothing.
Right.
But in retrospect, it's a cliffhanger to nothing, right? Like it's kind of just saying, hey, the other games happen. Crash is an episodic series where good versus evil. So Uka Uka comes and gets Cortex off the time beach. Like, I think that is just as much them like saying, hey, he gets off the time beach, and we're letting you know that so that all the other games can still happen, so that you guys don't have to wait 20 years for some other developer to address what happens on the fucking time beach.
Right.
Because there are people that are going to be like, I wonder if they'll ever address the cliffhanger at the end of Crash Bandicoot 4. And because we did for 25 years be like, I wonder if they're ever going to explain how Cortex and Entropy got out of the time warp. Well, yeah. Guess what? They fucking grew. They either grew up, they fucking fixed themselves with Entropy's time machine, which he still has because even though he's a little baby, he's still wearing it. I don't know if he knows how to use it very well. Maybe that's why it took so goddamn long, right? But like that goes back to another thing I was gonna say earlier. Another thing people like to be like, "Oh, this can't be canon because who made this mutant?" I'm like, one of the 50 guys with mutated rays. Jesus Christ! Like, Embryo's got one. Cortex has got one. Von Clutch probably has one. He's fucking a fanboy and he's a scientist of his own. He's got a bunch of this kind of crap.
See, that's like, what I would have really liked in Crash Bandicoot 4, with all of the nods to continuity and the flashback tapes and stuff. I would have liked during the flashback tapes if Cortex had like a one-off line being like, and this is what happens when you leak the blueprints to our Evolvo Ray online, Brio. Mutants start popping up everywhere.
And the other thing that always gets me is like, they're like, we don't know who created them. I'm like, my brother in Christ, there are literally 2 games in the series, Crash of the Titans and Crash of Mind Over Mutant, where Cortex and Embryo and Uka Uka make thousands of new guys with the Evolvo Ray. The odds-on favorite for where mutants came from is the Evolvo Ray.
Yes.
the odds are good.
Like, the
Right?
only other
Like-
ones we have confirmed to be created are Victor and Moritz from the 10th Dimension Waves or whatever.
And people are like, oh, well, why is the Viscount in Japan? Why is Pasadena with Von Clutch? I'm like, why the fuck is Dingo Dial living in a shack? Because he doesn't like Cortex. They literally just put out a comic being like, where was Catbat for all this time? Well, Catbat decided they didn't fucking like Cortex and they left.
They went and became the boss of the bats.
They went and did some shit. Like,
So that was the big timeline discussion. That's kind of the end of episode 1 of the N.Sane PodCrash.
I mean, that's the thing I'll say. Is like, I like obsessing over the lore and making explanations for stuff, but like, there's a sect of people who like can't handle nuance. Where if something isn't spelled out on paper, written down for you, like if fucking Aku Aku doesn't look at the screen and go, "Hey, did you know that during Twinsanity, when Crunch left the birthday party, he got stuck in the cave too? And then after that, he spent all of the game climbing out, and then Crash of the Titans is like a couple of games later. That's he got out of the cave, did a couple things with Crash, and then got frozen in ice. That's nuts, right? It's crazy how often this dude's getting trapped in shit. Like, you can't just... That sect of people can't then think to themselves, I didn't see this character for 5 games. They must have just not been involved in the plot. They have to, it has to be a plot hole to them that they're not involved in the plot. And I'm like, when you have a cast this big, and don't get me wrong, you can do it. Kingdom Hearts has shown you can have a cast of 40 guys and find them all screen time. But that's in like a 50-hour RPG, right? Like, Crash Bandicoot games typically have a very brisk story. We've got 6 to 8 hours, maybe an hour of that is cutscenes. You're not going to find a way to cram everybody in there. So, like, just think to yourself, I wonder what Pinstripe's doing. Mob stuff. It's what he does. He's a guy who shoots at things and does crime. If he's not doing things with Cortex, then you can just think to yourself, oh, he's off doing crime. Like,
I understand what you're trying to say. You're saying they don't need to fill in every single gap. You can just figure it out on your own.
It's not even that. Like, if they want to go back and fill in every gap, I wish they would. It would be cool and fun. Even if they did it as like a book or like a mobile game app or something, right? But like, my overall point is like, just because they don't fill in a gap doesn't mean that there's like a hole. It just means that there's space to tell more story later. It's not that something's wrong. It's that there are opportunities to tell stories later with that information. Or even that just like, like, I guess my overall point is that like, obsess over what's there, not over what's not, and you have a lot more fun with it because you can wire it up yourself like we just did for an hour or whatever, or however the fuck long it was. And like, that's not to say that we're correct until they canonize it, which they will because we're correct. But like, but like, that's the fun of it, right? Like, people can have their own take, and like if we look at it and analyze it, and God knows we have analyzed it. I've got you literally asked me to do this on a whim, and I'm like, yeah, let me pull up my text file.
Yeah.
So like, I've clearly thought about it, but like, I accept that until this stuff shows up in a game, I'm not right about the little details. But at the same time, if the fucking chief creative officer of Toys for Bob goes on a game developers convention talk and goes, all the other games are after this in its chronological timeline, I think you could probably count that. I think that's probably true. And we could, like, yes, in the marketing, they kind of, for Crash 4, before that, they made it sound like they didn't do that. They made it sound like they retconned stuff. The game itself does not do that, and it kind of feels like they really just wanted when Crash 4 came out for people to be surprised with what was in it. And I kind of feel like they thought, oh, if we say it's a mid-quel, people are going to think it's obvious what happens because it has to connect up to other stuff. And it does connect up to other stuff, but that doesn't change your excitement for the events that happen, right?
Yeah.
But if they had come out and said, oh, it retcons everything, then you have people like me who are like, oh, so I just, played these games for 20 years, led an online campaign to bring it back and keep it going, and then you just got rid of everything I liked except for the first 2 or 3. People always take the marketing they did for 4 as like, oh, we're getting rid of everything, and I think it was more meant to be like, oh, what could pop? Oh, we're calling it Crash 4. What could happen? Oh, what is it in the middle? Did we fucking erase everything? Is it alternate timelines? Is it alternate universes? Is it one timeline? And they kind of I feel like marketing fucked them on the messaging, because Paul and Lou Studdert and all them, when they did interviews, they always were, and I don't know if this is deliberate. It's just something I noticed. They always said may. They really loved to say those games may be in alternate timelines, and they would, it had like a tongue-in-cheek, who knows kind of thing to it. So that combined with the guy literally saying, oh, this joke where Lonnie Lowley says you've only beaten Cortex 3 times, that's weird, seemed like more, is joking about how there are going to be more later in this timeline. I think you can draw the conclusion that, I think they want everything to just be unified. So, even if they don't do it it goes to Team Racing, then to Bash Hero ending, then to Wrath, then to this, then to this, then to this. If they don't ever put out a timeline, we don't have to be right or wrong about those details. But, I think they are starting to lean towards putting everything together. And I think that makes the most sense, because we're getting to a point now where people are, coming into the age that they're buying games for themselves now. They're buying games for their kids. Their first game was Wrath of Cortex. Their first game was Twinsanity, right? So it behooves nobody to say, oh, these are the only real ones, because half of your audience grew up on those quote unquote new. They're not new anymore, but new ones, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's just it makes the most sense to put it all together, and that's my stance. It's like I said earlier, art style, music, character designs, whatever, but the story, events, that's what canonically matters to me. So Crash of the Titans, Cortex beefs up his Evolvo Ray with Mojo from Uka Uka, and then Tiny and Engine and Nina try to stop Crash, and they fail. And then, Nina overthrows Cortex for a little bit. And then the next game, Cortex overthrows Uka Uka because he's sick of it. On paper, those just sound like Crash games, right? It just sounds like a Crash story. So I think that's what they should do from now on. They should just do Crash stories that are just episodic, happen we keep saying at the end, but they should just start moving forward. Everything's canon, everybody's canon, everything, Sonic it.
Everything
MCU
happened, all the characters are there. Just start going forward with everything that has happened and have stories.
Exactly. It's a cartoon.
Okay, JB, do you want to do any plugging of any sort?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna plug.
Go ahead, plug.
You said this is going out immediately?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So obviously, if you know me, then you probably know about Summit Sphere, our game Anton Blast, coming. We'll be talking about the release timing for that soon. On Nintendo Switch and PC on Steam. Wishlist the game on Steam. It's the best thing you can do for us. make us extremely popular, because we have other cool things in the pipeline that we're trying to make happen. Uh, Follow me on Twitter at JumpButtonCB. JB long with the little explosion next to it, because I'm blast verified, because God forbid I do anything that is Elon Musky. Yeah, follow at SummitSphere on Twitter and everything else. In case Twitter blows up, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads.
And MySpace. Don't forget MySpace.
We might be on that. I don't think we're on Mastodon, so don't look for us on that. Yeah.
Okay, JB, we appreciate the time and the. Oh, you got more?
Yeah, one more plug. I think we're basically pretty public about this. If you go on their website and search for us, we pop up. So, I mean, we're not doing a very good job of hiding it. If you're going to be at PAX West September 1st through the 4th, or whatever the hell it is, we're going to be there, and we're going to be having a big fancy booth with a lot of booths where you can play Anton Blast, and you can buy fancy merchandise like pens and others that I don't remember right now. You'll know us from the big neon Anton Blast sign, which may or may not be a joke.
Okay, sir. Thank you for coming and having a conversation with me.
You're welcome.
And we might do an episode 2 discussing some other crashy stuff. So that was episode 1 of the N.Sane PodCrash. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video. Have a great night.